So today we're going to be kicking off a brand new series where we're talking about my favorite movie from every year, starting with the 1930s. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Cobwebs channel where we're dusting off old movies. My name is Daniel, and for this brand new series, we're going to be going through every decade, video by video, and talk about my personal favorite movie from every single year. And this first video is on the 1930s. That's where I chose to start things off. And I'm very excited, and I do want to say just right off the bat that this very much is about my personal favorite movie. This isn't about what is the most important movie of that year, what's the most influential, iconic movie. This is all about my personal favorites, and I think that's what makes it fun. So starting with the 30s, we'll go at least through the 1990s. Not sure if we'll go past that just because this is an old movie channel, but we'll play it by ear. So starting off with 1930, I will just say that my knowledge and passion for movies really kicks off with 1931. So 1930 is a bit of a rough year for me. There's not a lot that I've seen. So a little bit by default, I'm going to go with the Marx Brothers with Animal Crackers. I am definitely a Marx Brothers fan. I wouldn't call Animal Crackers one of my top favorites, but I do really enjoy it. It's a little bit of an interesting experience watching it today. This is from 1930, a very long time ago. And I think today we really want comedies to be very tight, quick, and efficient. Just make us laugh, get in and get out. And I think some of my favorite Marx Brothers movies do that, like Duck Soup and Horse Feathers. Animal Crackers is a little bit longer. It's over 90 minutes. There's a lot of time to breathe, and it has a very episodic, skit-based structure. Groucho Marx plays Captain Spaulding. Shout out to Rob Zombie fans out there. You know what I'm talking about. Who just returned from an expedition in Africa, and he comes to this very rich woman's house who's throwing a party in honor of him. And it's him and the Marx Brothers just kind of getting into a lot of wacky shenanigans around this giant mansion. And it's definitely fun. It's got a lot of great sequences. My personal favorite is when Groucho Marx is having a conversation with Mr. Chandler and they're introducing themselves over and over again. Overall, Groucho's monologues are my favorite parts of this movie. Those are the parts that make me laugh the most. And there's definitely a lot of funny stuff. But like I said, a lot of room to breathe in this. This is a time when comedies, I think, were more so meant to be a full night of entertainment at the movies. So the movie stops for Chico to play the piano. It stops for Harpo to play the harp. There's just a lot of downtime in this movie in between the more zany fun stuff. So it doesn't hold up amazingly, and it's not a movie I rewatch a lot like I do with Duck Soup and Horse Feathers, but definitely a good time. I enjoy Animal Crackers. 1931 is a tough one, and really the runner-up here is the horror genre. The Universal monsters really got their true start in 1931 with Dracula and Frankenstein, two movies that mean so much to me. And then Paramount made a horror movie that's maybe even better, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde with Frederick March. So I love the horror movies of 1931. But for my absolute favorite, I'm actually going to stick with the comedy genre and go for my personal favorite Charlie Chaplin film, and I love Chaplin, and that is City Lights. City Lights is in the series of tramp movies where Charlie Chaplin plays the tramp, and in this one, he has a lot of different things going on. He meets a very rich man who's very drunk, and they become good friends, but the rich man can only remember him when he's drunk. As soon as he sobers up, he kicks the tramp out. The tramp gets involved in boxing, and for my favorite storyline in the movie, he falls in love with a blind flower girl. This is an example of a silent film that still has synchronized sound. It has synchronized score and sound effects and such, even though it is still a silent film. And I just love Charlie Chaplin. I find him incredibly funny. I think this is one of Chaplin's funniest movies. Chaplin has so much heart, so much emotion that I think a lot of his silent comedian contemporaries didn't quite have to Chaplin's level. And I find the romance to be really beautiful in this film. And it all crescendos to one of the greatest endings of all time. So I love Chaplin. City Lights is my favorite. And as much as I love the horror films of 1931, I'm going to go with City Lights. For 1932, I do want to give a special shout out to Trouble in Paradise, directed by Ernst Lubitsch, one of my favorite directors of all time. That's a great romantic comedy / con artist film. Very sexy, very funny. I especially love Kay Francis in the film. I'm a big Kay Francis fan. But 1932 is where the Universal monsters are going to win out for me, and that is The Mummy, directed by Carl Freud, who was the cinematographer on Dracula. And this film definitely has a lot in common, story-wise, with Dracula. Unlike Dracula and Frankenstein, this is not based on a book. It's an original movie. It's the first mummy monster in pop culture. And I think what it really comes down to for me is I love Boris Karloff in this movie so much. I think too many people just limit the great stuff in this movie to it's just the opening scene, which is the only scene when we see Boris Karloff wrapped up as a mummy and walking around. I think people find this movie disappointing because very little of it is a shambling mummy monster killing people. But if you want that, all of the Universal Mummy sequels are that. So you can watch that in any of those movies. Also, Hammer's the Mummy with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. It fits that as well. But this is very much a gothic romance film. And I find the gothic atmosphere to be totally intoxicating in this movie. It is very romantic in a super morbid, dark way. I just love all that so much. And I love Boris Karloff's performance throughout the entire movie. A lot of people call this movie slow. I don't really see it. For me, a movie's not really slow unless it's boring. And I just never think this movie is boring. I do think Zita Johann is the most interesting of the female leads in all of these early Universal Monsters films. She's really great too. This is a beautiful gothic film. I absolutely love it. It's my favorite movie of 1932. For 1933, it was really tough for me not to stick with monsters and go with King Kong. I love King Kong so much. It's definitely one of the most influential and important movies of all time. And it's still my favorite movie in that franchise. But I'm going to go with my heart, be totally honest, and say my favorite is Gold Diggers of 1933, aptly titled, which is a Busby Berkeley musical. It's part of an early trilogy of just early Busby Berkeley musicals that had a lot of the same cast: Footlight Parade, 42nd Street, and Gold Diggers of 1933. And I think this one is easily the best of them. It's the only one that's really about something. It's got some great social commentary about the Great Depression, has a lot to say about that time period, while still staying very light and fun. This is also the one that mixes in the musical numbers evenly throughout the film. While Footlight Parade and 42nd Street mostly pack them all at the end, this has a really good mix of, you get a lot of dialogue, then you get a musical number, and so on and so forth. I love the plot of this movie. Dick Powell is a secretly rich guy who ends up funding a musical during the Great Depression when no one else would fund it, and his rich older brother's trying to pull him back, and Joan Blondell and a couple of the other girls are trying to con this rich older brother and his two rich friends. And the romance that blooms between Joan Blondell and that rich older brother is my favorite part of the movie. I think it's so charming and fun, and the musical numbers are spectacular. If you've never seen a Busby Berkeley musical, you've just never seen musical numbers this impressive, probably in your entire life. I especially love Pettin' in the Park, which is a super pre-code musical that would have never happened after the Hays Code really got implemented. It's so fun to watch for that reason, but it's also super cool technical wise. And there's this great musical number at the end called The Forgotten Man, with just heavy, deep, sad commentary about what happened to people during the Great Depression. So it's a movie that's about something, but still never lets go that it is a fun comedy romp. Love this movie, one of my favorite musicals. 1934 was an incredible year. A great Universal horror film with The Black Cat, one of my favorite early action adventure films with Tarzan and his mate, and the screwball comedy genre really kicked off proper with Frank Capra's It Happened One Night. So just a banner year for so many genres, but my favorite is an easy call, one of my absolute favorite films of all time, definitely in my top 20, gotta be, and that is The Thin Man, starring William Powell and Myrna Loy. Kicked off the whole franchise of Thin Man movies, big fan of those movies, but nothing touches this original. It is so much fun. It's ultimately a murder mystery detective movie about Nick and Nora Charles, who are just the best married couple of all time, having fun, drinking a lot, having a lot of cutesy banter, and solving a murder. This is also a pretty important movie because film historian Andrew Sarris said that this was the first Hollywood movie to really show a couple in which marriage didn't mean the end of sex and adventure and fun for them, because they're married from the start of this movie, but they're always just having a great time, and they're super cute in this movie. I think what makes this movie such a comfortable watch is that Nick and Nora are so comfortable together. This is not an intense romance, so there's not a lot of arguing or any kind of intensity. They're just very relaxed and they have fun. And I think that's a big appeal of just William Powell as Nick Charles as a detective, because he's a guy who doesn't expend any energy that he doesn't absolutely have to. He's totally cool with just hanging back, relaxing while he figures things out. And then once he's ready, he'll jump in and save the day. So The Thin Man is such a funny, a fun, kind of adorable movie, but it's also a really good murder mystery in which I really get invested in that aspect too. So for 1935, this was a bit of a tough one for me. It was really a race between two movies, because on one hand, you've got Errol Flynn's breakout role in one of my favorite pirate movies, one of my favorite swashbucklers of all time, Captain Blood. That one was pretty close, but 1935 is also the year that Bride of Frankenstein came out. And what can I say? Bride of Frankenstein just has to take it. One of the best of the Universal monsters films. One of the most thematically rich and most visually striking for sure. But I think it's Boris Karloff that makes this movie absolutely, the second Boris Karloff movie that's taken the list, by the way. This is the one where he becomes the unequivocal leading man of the movie, the main character. While he was just more of a monster in that first movie, they really ramp up the sympatheticness of him and really make him the lead character. And I just love him in this movie so much. This movie has so many memorable sequences like Karloff with the blind man or Dr. Pretorius and his tiny people that he made, which is still a part of the movie I don't totally understand, but I find super entertaining. Elsa Lanchester as the Bride of Frankenstein doesn't get a lot of screen time, but she makes such an impression, and she's still one of the most iconic images of all of monster movies to this day. For 1936, it's really between two comedies. Gotta give a shout out to Libeled Lady, which I talked about on my top 10 Screwball comedies video just recently, also starring William Powell and Myrna Loy. Huge fan of Libeled Lady, but I'm gonna give it to Fred and Ginger with Swing Time, which is my favorite of the Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers musicals. They made a lot of movies together. I'm a big fan of that run in cinema, but yes, this one is my favorite. The film does star Fred Astaire as Lucky, a gambler and dancer who's trying to secure some money to really secure his marriage to his fiance, but he meets a dance instructor played by Ginger Rogers, and the two fall in love and try to figure out what to do with this situation. I'm just such a huge fan of Ginger Rogers. I really like Fred Astaire as well, but Ginger Rogers is the one that makes these movies for me. She's so incredibly charming and funny in addition to being a great singer and dancer. This movie has so many songs that have held up to this day, songs that still get covered to this day, like The Way You Look Tonight, A Fine Romance, Pick Yourself Up. I just think these Fred and Ginger movies, they hold up so much better than a lot of the musicals of their time, even though I really love old musicals, but these movies are so tight and effective. They're so funny. The comedy elements totally work to this day, and the musical numbers are amazing, and just the songs are total bangers. I just love the songs in these movies. By the way, Swing Time is still the only one of the Fred and Ginger movies that is on Blu-ray in the United States, so thank you Criterion for that, but come on, let's get more of these things on Blu-ray. I'm begging you. 1937 had a couple strong runner-ups for me. Again, shout out to Fred and Ginger because Shall We Dance is my second favorite of their collaboration, so that's definitely an honorable mention. And Disney really kicked off the animated film genre with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1937. But my favorite is my favorite classic swashbuckler that does not star Errol Flynn, and that is The Prisoner of Zenda, starring Robert Coleman. Robert Coleman stars as an Englishman who bears a very striking resemblance to the man who's about to be crowned king. When the king is drugged and kidnapped, Robert Coleman is asked to step in and pretend to be the king so that the coronation does not get thrown off track. I love Robert Coleman in this movie. He's so good as an everyman who's not really up to the task of being a swashbuckler. You throw Errol Flynn into a movie like this and he's immediately going to be so heroic and capable. But Robert Coleman plays it a lot more low key, and that makes him such an underdog that's really easy to root for. And he's great once he has to really step up and fill the shoes of that swashbuckling hero. I love the villains in this movie. Raymond Massey is of course great as a villain. He always is. But Douglas Fairbanks Jr. as the heavy who really does all the dirty work for the villain, absolutely the standout. He is a great slimy scumbag who has great fight scenes with Robert Coleman, great swashbuckling sword fights. And this movie has a beautiful romance, probably just one of the best romances in any of these classic swashbucklers, with Madeline Carroll. This is such a lovely, lush, romantic period piece film that still totally hits in the action department. Moving on to 1938, in most any other year, Howard Hawks' Bringing Up Baby would take the cake because Bringing Up Baby is a comedy masterpiece with Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. But it's 1938 and The Adventures of Robin Hood came out, so The Adventures of Robin Hood has to take the cake. Easily one of my top 10 movies of all time, one of my favorite action adventure films ever made. I'm a huge fan of the Robin Hood genre. I did a whole top 10 list on my favorite Robin Hood movies, and this is easily my favorite. Errol Flynn is born to play this role. He was never better in any movie, I think, than he is in this. He's the perfect altruistic, great hero who's totally capable to kick bad guy butts and totally capable to stand up for the little guy. And you got Basil Rathbone as a villain, so of course your movie is going to be good. It's such a lush, colorful, wildly expensive film with some amazing stunt work in the action scenes, including people actually getting shot with arrows. They just put pads on the actors so they could actually shoot them. It's crazy. They would never do that today, but it makes for a really, really entertaining movie. I love The Adventures of Robin Hood so much. If I can can convince you to watch any movie that you haven't seen yet, that would be the one. But let's close things out with the final year of this decade, 1939, often considered the most important year in all of film history, quite possibly. It's the year in which Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz came out, two of the most successful movies ever made. It's the year that Mr. Smith Goes to Washington came out, which is probably my runner-up, but I'm going to go with my heart, and to be totally honest, my favorite is John Ford's Stagecoach, which is the earliest Western that I truly love, and it's John Wayne's breakout role. This is a movie with a fairly simple premise. It's about a bunch of people on a stagecoach traveling through who have a lot of very interesting interaction with a lot of social commentary laced through, and they end up getting attacked by the Apache. This is an incredible action film. This might even be more important and more influential than The Adventures of Robin Hood. The stunt work in the final chase scene is so mind-blowing as you watch stuntmen jump from horse to horse. It's such an incredible action film. But man, the romance between John Wayne as Ringo and Claire Trevor as Dallas, who's actually a sex worker in the movie, is so beautiful because he's a man, he's an outlaw. So they're both kind of outcasts who shouldn't find happiness, but they find happiness together, which just makes them wonderful underdogs to root for. And I'm always surprised what a great romantic leading man John Wayne makes, but he really, really does. And of course, John Wayne has the most iconic introduction shot in almost in all of movies. It's amazing. I love Stagecoach so much. It is one of my favorite Westerns, and it's the earliest example of a Western that's one of my top favorites. So that's it, folks. My favorite movie from every year of the 1930s. Click that subscribe button if you want to see my favorite movie from every year of the 1940s, which I'm hoping to have out next week. I've already started making that list, and that's a really tough one, so we'll see how that goes. Give a like if you did enjoy this video, and thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time.